Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're delighted that you're with us, and we're really excited. I am really excited to have two uh, incredible guests with us and two great people associated with the powerful, moving film, The People versus Agent Orange. Um, this is our fourth film in our series, our last film, our democracy film series that we are co-sponsoring the Ohio Community Rights Network with Simply Living. So first, our two guests, Alan Adelson. He's the director, producer, and writer of the film, The People versus Agent Orange. And he has overlapping careers in documentary film and investigative journalism. Alan produced and co-directed Lod's Ghetto with Kate Taverna. The documentary was shortlisted for the Academy Award Best Documentary Oscar. The filmmaker couple also produced and directed Two Villages in Kosovo for Arts, or Arti, I don't know how that's pronounced, and the widely acclaimed In Bed with Ulysses 2012. Adelson made worldwide headlines with his investigative articles in Esquire and the Wall Street Journal, revealing the disappearance of enriched plutonium from an American nuclear reprocessing plant. Carol Van Strum is a writer, bookseller, ruthless editor, chronic book reviewer, aged parent, seasoned troublemaker. Her books include A Bit of Fog, Herbicides and Human Rights, the Oreo File, No Margin of Safety, and The Politics of Penta. She has been a proofreader and toxics and legal researcher for environmental lawyers since 1975 and was the sole editor and online book reviewer for the Department of the Planet Earth until the demise of its founder, as well as researcher and copy editor for mangabay.com and Tropical Conservation Science Journal. With me is also Chuck Lynn. He's with Simply Living, which is co-sponsoring this film series. And like I said, this is our fourth one and our last one for this year. And Simply Living, they're a community organization that celebrates and connects people to learning opportunities that promote community sustainability, environmental awareness, and our local economy through educational outreach and partnerships within our community. And I'm Bill Lyons, president of the Ohio Community Rights Network. And our mission is to establish a network of just communities throughout Ohio. And of course, we've got quite a few already, working to advance, secure, and protect the inalienable rights of all Ohioans to democratic local self-governance, to sustainable food, energy, economic systems, and the rights of nature to exist and flourish throughout Ohio. So I don't know, my reaction after seeing the film is the first thing that comes to my mind is outrage. If you want to share your thoughts, emotions, what came to you, what did you feel? Please feel free to include that, type it in the chat. And as you have questions, or if you have some already, please include those and we will try to get to as many as we can. So let me start out. Alan, can you explain to our audience how you found out about this issue, why you decided to create the film, and how you found Carol?
Well, those are several very salutary events, and they're coming together really seems in retrospect to have been extremely fortuitous, Bill. It began typically a New York story. I'm at a party. A young woman, an actress, approaches me and says, "So you make documentary films. You have to make the world aware of these pathetic children." And she held her cell phone up to my face and showed me images of those terribly deformed, outrageously unnatural children whose genetic makeup had been attacked by exposure to Agent Orange, either themselves personally or their parents. And I didn't want to make the film. I thought Agent Orange is an old story, and this is a world with new problems. But the investigative journalist in me, the part of my career that you mentioned, Bill, was speaking up even as I was resisting, saying, if these children and their suffering were the results of conscious mercenary decisions on the part of corporate executives at the chemical companies, who willingly or knowingly would accept these deformities as associated with the profit motive of selling their chemicals, then making this film would be a cautionary tale that could help society in general. And that was 10 years ago. The film is now out. We are delighted that it's getting the attention it is. Bill, we're so grateful for your inclusion of it in the Democracy Film Festival there in Ohio. We're well aware of the extremely pressing environmental needs that Ohio is experiencing, and we have the deepest respect for the community environmental rights movement. So we're all in this together. Everyone watching now who may be outraged as you were, Bill, I hope we'll get a chance to talk about what to do with that emotion, and the variety of other emotions that the film stirs up, and see if we can do some good and correct this evil. In terms of finding Carol and Toronto Nya, that's a very big and important aspect of documentary making. Without characters to tell the story, we have a very dehumanized and legalistic format. Both Toronto Nya and Carol Van Strum came to our attention through media coverage, as mundane a source as Google Alerts, which I've been reading daily for that decade. Madame Tran broke into the media when she filed a lawsuit against 26 American chemical companies more than 7 years ago in France. And Carol broke into the media. She'll tell me more precisely, but I'd estimate about 4 or 5 years ago when the Intercept did a marvelous profile of her and her colleagues and the fight that they were waging to hold the chemical companies accountable.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, Carol, you first became involved with this issue when your children were sprayed with these chemicals, correct? And so how did you come to first find out what the spray really was?
Well, we found out what it really was. My children got sprayed while they were playing by the river, and a tank truck came along spraying the roadside and just soaked them in something. We didn't know what it was at the time, but they all got very, very sick. And when we called, we live on a county road, but it's maintained jointly with the Forest Service. So we called the county and asked them what was in that spray truck. And they said, oh, it's only it's only 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T. It's perfectly harmless, safe as table salt. No, it couldn't have made them sick. So but when we went down to the river the next day and saw everything dead down there, I mean, dead fish floating on the water, and dead ducklings bobbing along the shore, and crayfish, everything was dead. And that's when we really got alarmed, because up until then we thought, well, maybe it was a coincidence that the kids got so sick, and the dog that was with them. And but then when we looked up those two chemicals, and you have to realize this was in 1975, it was long before the internet. We had to drive like 80 miles to get to a library to look things up.
Wow.
And but discovered they were the same ingredients as Agent Orange, and that Agent Orange had been banned in Vietnam, the use of it by the military, in 1970. And here they were in 1975, the federal government was spraying it all over the place out here. And that's how we got involved, because I wrote a letter to the editor that fall, asking, just telling what had happened here. And people came out of the woodwork telling us that the same things had happened to them. I mean, horror stories of horses losing all their hair and dying, and cattle. It was, you know, hunters and loggers who found dead elk, and what do they call it? Like miscarried fetuses from elk and deer lying in the forest. So our community, we live in a valley of maybe 50 to 75 families, but we held a little public meeting just of ourselves to talk about this. And first we naively thought, if you just tell the Forest Service what's going on, they won't do it anymore. I mean, you know, seemed obvious to us, but not to the Forest Service. They refused to accept that anything bad happened. And at that point, we started looking for a lawyer, which was not easy because none of us knew anything about it. And also no lawyer in their right mind wanted to sue the federal government. But we did finally find a wonderful attorney named Bruce Anderson, who was willing to take on the case if we did all the research. And that's how I got into doing research.
Wow. Yeah. You've been doing it now for what? More than
45.
4 decades, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. So this film, yeah, there's the two main parts to it that are interwoven. First, there's what I call the greatest environmental crime in history. And I think that's not hyperbole. And that took place in Vietnam. And in my opinion, that seems like this is a war crime or a crime against humanity. And I think most people who's decent would feel that way. But it just seems unfathomable that shortly afterwards, that it was stopped in 71 in Vietnam and it's used in the US. Alan, did you have any idea when you started researching this that Agent Orange was used in the US?
No, it came as a shock to us as filmmakers, just as it does to those who view the film. The backstory on that is incredible, Bill. A forestry expert, forestry professor in Oregon had read and seen images, apparently, of the tremendous stockpile of unused herbicides, Agent Orange, which is named for the orange stripe that bands the barrels the chemical companies loaded the herbicide into when they shipped it to Vietnam. And tons of that material had been shipped out to be destroyed in the South Pacific. But this forestry professor proposed to use it to stifle the growth of broadleaf weeds so that Oregon's cash crop, the Douglas fir, could grow without competition. The conifers, the Douglas fir, didn't respond to the herbicide. And they had clear cut all of these mountainsides surrounding Carroll's Valley and throughout really the Pacific Northwest. And this professor asserted that using the herbicide would totally revolutionize the timber industry in the Pacific Northwest. And he became a major proponent of using the herbicides. I just add this one more sidelight. You're right that it is perhaps the most destructive instance of a deliberate attack on the environment, a sustained and hugely toxic attack on the environment. And now at The Hague, the International Criminal Court is considering codifying a crime called ecocide, the prevalent assault on the environment and its inhabitants. And they're hoping to be able to hold people who would propagate such an attack accountable for a crime, not necessarily a crime against humanity, not necessarily a crime against the environment, but the combination of those two, which was evoked back in the years of the Vietnam War with the term ecocide. And that movement is now seriously underway, with efforts being made all around the world to encourage the International Criminal Court in The Hague to adopt this law and enforce it.
Yeah. You mentioned about the Oregon State University professor. I think his name was Michael Newton. And one of the newspaper articles in the film, I paused and read it, and it said that he obtained these chemicals. He got the idea in his head somewhere and obtained them without authorization first from a storage site in Gulfport, Mississippi, I believe. Yeah, can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, he not only obtained it, but put it into use so that
I interrupt here. He used it right here in the Siuslaw National Forest in our neighborhood.
Thank you,
And there
Carol.
was
No
crime.
interruption at all.
Yeah.
So Carol and her neighbors were getting exposed to it right away. And then the road crews and the helicopter spraying companies took up the mantle and began to spread that toxin ever wider. So that now, even today, although they're using different herbicides, the campaign against the aerial spraying of herbicides is being bitterly fought. And I'm sure Carol can tell us more about that.
Yes. Yeah, please, Carol, go ahead.
Well, that's part of the community rights, movement that's been happening. Is our county, Lincoln County, has a community rights group, the Lincoln County Community Rights, and they, in 2017, excuse me.
What's a century among friends?
Anyway, the forever chemicals.
They put on our local county ballot a measure that would ban the use of aerial spraying of poisons, any kind of poisons, in our county. And it was one of those typical bitterly fought campaigns, because of course the chemical and timber industry just flooded the county with expensive flyers and radio and TV ads and just saying what a disaster this would be if, you know, the world was going to end if they couldn't aerial spray poisons. And oddly enough, the voters of Lincoln County passed the measure, and immediately it was challenged in court by industry groups. And for at least 2 years, though, the measure was in force while the court supposedly took her time to deciding. But when her decision finally came down, it was in favor of the industry groups who had argued that state law preempts any local control over things like aerial spraying or pesticide use. And that's as a result of nationwide, in all 50 states, industries, you know, extractive industries, you know, mining and fracking and logging, all those things that rip apart the natural environment to make money, had gotten into state legislatures with their heavy lobbying power. They had gotten laws passed that would forbid local control over these kinds of issues. And that happened also in Oregon. And that's where the court felt like it had no choice, even though she made very clear she was on our side, that she had no choice but to say state law preempts it. And right now it is on appeal. I mean, and who knows what will happen, but that's where it stands. And one useful thing to know is that written right into the measure was the rights of the ecosystem, the rights of nature to have a say in court. And so that's where we are right now. I got to be the Lorax and speak for the trees and the river system in favor of staying alive. So.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought it, because the community rights movement that you're involved with there in Oregon, and of course we've got the Ohio Community Rights Network, which you know, that's I'm president of, and we have community groups throughout Ohio, and then we have them in Pennsylvania and New Hampshire and Virginia and Oregon. Let's see, I might be forgetting one, but anyhow, that's the idea that communities, we think we live in a democracy, and that's part of the reason we chose this, to say, well, if we have a democracy, shouldn't the people rule? Isn't that what democracy really means? And especially in their own communities, if they want to keep out harmful things like toxic sprays and fracking or plastic bags, or if they want to do other good things like increase the minimum wage and other things like that, they should be able to do that. But you're right that right now, the way the law is stood from past court decisions, that preemption prevents the people from getting the democracy that they would like locally there. So yeah, that's.
I just want. I was going to chime in, Bill, to say that I think this dynamic of preemption and the power that it gives to the corporations that can lobby and influence the state legislatures and the federal government. This is, I think, the greatest challenge the environmental movement faces today. We have to reverse that preemption. Carol says in the film, we have the right to protect ourselves from being poisoned, but preemption is challenging that right. And these community vested movements need to reverse the legislation, to adopt legislation which puts the power back in the hands of the communities that are being impaired and being threatened with these environmental toxins.
Yeah, I think Alan, that state preemption idea. I know that there's been some initiatives to recognize the community rights at the state level, that Pennsylvania, Colorado have had them introduced. And you know how it works is you don't expect to win the first time. And I'm not sure if Oregon has there been any effort to introduce anything like that statewide, Carol, in Oregon?
Well, there are some state measures. I think they're still trying to get signatures for some of them, but at least several other counties have also community rights organizations like Lane County that are fighting similar issues. It's very important, and people really need to know, because they don't know what has happened. They don't know that in secret, basically, their rights have just been totally removed. And a lot of it is largely due to something called ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which is nationwide. They work in every state, and they basically suck up legislators and get them into their fold and get legislation passed that is totally protective of industry's profits over the health or safety of both people and the environment. It's an appalling situation, and people don't know it.
Yeah. Yeah, and Alan, you brought up about the power of corporations and the absurdity that corporations are recognized as people, and then they've taken over the First, Fourth, Fifth, and 14th Amendment, and they have more power than we have, because money is speech now also, from the Citizen United's decision. And so they have so much power and influence in our elected system that where's the change? A lot of people think, well, make the change by appealing to our legislators and all. Sure, it helps to get better people, but what's really going to push that change? Carol, I saw you shaking your head.
Well, I don't know. I don't know where it's going to come from. One useful thing would be a few really brave prosecutors who, I mean, if a corporation is a person with human rights, they also have human responsibilities and can be held liable. And a corporation should therefore be subject to capital punishment for intentional murder of people, because that's what it amounts to. They know their behavior is going to cause deaths, and they've convinced the U.S. Congress, state legislators, that, oh well, it's okay to have a few people die every time we do this because it's worth it. We make a lot of money. Well, that's not an attitude that should be widely accepted, and it is. It really is.
Yeah, Carol, you also brought up, oh yeah, go ahead, Chuck. You're muted, Chuck.
I just wanted to reinforce that and say that this is also, well, Move to Amend, as Bill well knows, has a proposal for the 28th Amendment to eliminate that whole idea. Just a very simple message that money is not speech and corporations are not people. So be aware that that exists and talk to I mean, that's a key part of getting money out of politics, because the corporate influence is to fund the campaigns, not just at the national level, but as Carol says, at the state level and below. We even had situations where issues in Columbus affecting the zoo, of all things, involved this influx of money and campaigns and distorted information. And I just wanted to add that it's international, the international treaties, even which are designed, you know, the trade agreements, NAFTA and all of these international trade agreements are designed for corporations to basically have that influence to be able to challenge in court their right to make money and not have interference from people like Carol and people showing films that document their absurd practices. And even the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank have, IMF has said, look, you can't keep doing this. You're creating all this income inequality. It's a terrible thing. This is their institution. The World Bank has said, you know, you can't keep making these investments in fossil fuels. It's just common sense. But their outsized control is something we have to make the change from the bottom up. That's one of the things we do at Simply Living, is we encourage people the fact that, yes, these are terrible situations, but we need to build a new system, as we're doing in agriculture, for example. Local foods as a movement. So if the stuff falls apart, you know, the international multinational corporations running our economies, they need to be challenged from the bottom up. Say, no, we want our locally owned businesses. So anyway, I just say that as a general principle on how to make change. Don't be discouraged. We're building alternatives all the time. There's new economic systems. There's new political approaches like we're just talking about. And there's new monetary fiscal policies that are they're available. So when the systems continue to fail, as they are, these new infrastructures that are being built for sustainability, we're not just at a loss. We have a platforms to create the world we want.
Yeah. Well, Chuck, you mentioned about push things locally and from the ground up or grassroots level. Really, any movement that has come about, whether it's women getting the right to vote or the abolitionist movement, all have come from grassroots efforts pushing change from, you know, the bottom up. And the more communities that get involved, like we say, if more and more communities had trying to pass community bills of rights and enact some of these measures, then that's how you start to gain some power here on these things. But one of the things also talking about the community rights movement, Carol, is most community bills of rights, like we've passed some in Ohio as well, and Lake Erie Bill of Rights being one of those there, that they also have a rights of nature provision. And you mentioned that a bit, that nature has the right to exist and flourish and regenerate. And by destroying nature, we're destroying ourselves, and we can't see a better example now of what we're doing to our climate here. Yeah, how do you think that provisions would work and prevent some of this harmful chemical action that's happening?
Which provision? You mean like the rights of nature? Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
the rights of nature, if adopted, yeah. And it's been adopted worldwide too, in a lot of countries. And
Oh,
besides,
yeah, different individual ecosystems, like in Canada, certain lakes have been recognized as having rights, and I think several other countries, including New Zealand. So it's not the kind of lunatic fringe idea that it was thought to be back in the 1970s when, you know, Justice Douglas proposed it. He was the one who's put it right into the Supreme Court record that we have to do this, but of course no one else listened. And I think it is very, very important, given not just the global nature of commerce today, but the global effects of commerce. They aren't just affecting whatever they're doing in a particular place, because the damage they do it keeps spreading. It's like throwing a rock in the water. The ripples keep spreading. And it's wonderful that the United Nations, that they were starting to recognize, like, this movement to get ecocide declared a crime in the international court. But it's going to be toothless unless nature has rights.
yeah. I know the EU is also working on a provision
Yes.
that's establishing rights of nature, and I've been on some of those.
Oh yeah, and you're going to see you'll see the usual typical, but it'll be bigger than usual reaction from corporate profiteers, because that threatens their entire being, so to speak. Because this is Oregon, but it happens everywhere, like in the Amazon, clear cutting. If you clear cut. That in itself is an act of ecocide, because they destroy, it's like strip mining. They cut down everything that lives is gone. There's just bare soil getting eroded, getting sunburnt, and things can't grow in it because they spray the hell out of it. They couldn't do that anymore if that ecosystem had a right to exist without being killed and poisoned and maimed and everything else. So that's just one business that would be really affected. But fracking, same thing. All the extractive industries, and it has to happen, because where are we? I mean, will it happen in time? I don't know, because I fear that we've been so sucked into an economic system built on cancerous growth that people can't live without it. I mean, it's like telling the world, it's like telling someone they can't smoke anymore or they're going to die, and the world can't stop. They can't give it up.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Go ahead.
Alan, one thing that I want to come back to that, but one thing that was on my mind is that helicopter pilot in the film. What's happened since he was in the film, and how's he doing? Because it seemed like he was having health effects from his exposure to those chemicals.
Yeah, that's Daryl Ivey. He's a hero in my eyes. He took it on himself to be a whistleblower. The whistleblowers and the voices for nature are among our greatest hopes, I think. In Daryl's case, we see in the film he's kind of going through this arc of self-awareness. He's signed on to a gig job servicing the helicopters with herbicides from that truck that we see him piloting around. But he knows that what those helicopters are doing is contaminating the watersheds. He's personally witnessing the spraying of reservoirs and streams that are funneling down into the community's water supplies there in Oregon. And he thinks, I think I better record this. And it's remarkable to us as filmmakers that he had the confidence that these little cell phone videos he was making would reach a broad audience. He sent them to the Oregonian, the primary newspaper there in Oregon. They put a few of the video clips up on their website. We found them. We found Daryl. It was not easy because the Oregonian, with good reason, was protecting his identity and his whereabouts. But eventually the publisher of the newspaper gave me the opportunity to reach out via email. And 10 minutes after that email went out, Daryl Ivey was there on the phone after weeks of effort to find him. And he was absolutely delighted to work with us. You're right, Bill, he got really, really sick from his exposure to the herbicides that he was helping to be sprayed. His skin broke out. He had terrible trouble breathing. He was coughing up blood, as you see in the film. Now he is an absolute health cultist, if I can put it that way. His body is his temple. He reveres it. He is an health food addict. He's preparing daily drinks and working out in the gym for hours every day. He wants to write a book cautioning people on how they can nourish themselves without exposure to toxins. And I think he's really, really proud of the contribution that he's made to the movement.
Yeah,
And we're deeply grateful to him. He brings it to life. He's an eyewitness, and he's sharing that with all of us now.
yeah, definitely very brave, and I'm so glad he did when you found him. I've got some questions about the chemical, and like the Agent Orange was composed of what, 2,4,5-T and 2,4-D, but there's a question about where is 2,4-D still being sprayed, and Carol, it is still a part of a lot of herbicides and pesticides. I think in the film, it said something like 750 herbicides and pesticides either use it or it's like the mother of those. Is that correct?
Oh, it's,
Yeah, the EP.
go ahead, Alan.
Go ahead, Carol. No, after you.
Oh, it is still being, until
Oh, you froze up a bit, Carol. Okay. Okay, well, Alan, maybe you jump in while Carol hopefully.
Okay, to cover you, Carol, and maybe proximity to your modem or whatever would help because you did freeze up. Yeah, the EPA notes that 2,4-D is an ingredient in hundreds, actually more than 1,000 herbicidal products. It is one of the most widely used herbicides in the world today, and it is half of Agent Orange. And its toxicity has been substantiated, and Carol has provided us with documentation about that. Also, glyphosate or Roundup, which is terribly controversial today and has haunted Monsanto and the German chemical and pharmaceutical conglomerate Bayer, which bought Monsanto and great grief in doing so several years ago. And the carcinogenic potential of these chemicals. Imagine spraying from the sky hundreds, thousands of gallons of this herbicide to come down and poison people's food and their water supply. How ridiculous and ignorant can we be? And the masters of industry are not going to be able to avoid exposure to those toxins either, and their children and their grandchildren as well. On the People versus Agent Orange website, the film's website, we have a resource section, as well as many panel discussions which post the sort of information that we're conveying and sharing today. And a biologist at the University of Washington, whose work I think deserves a Nobel Prize, has substantiated that exposure to these toxins bears a legacy that will come back and increase the incidence of disease in our future generations. Our grandchildren are going to bear a legacy of cancer and deformity as a result of our own exposure to these herbicides now. So we talk all the time about what we're doing for our children and our concerns for education, etc. And meanwhile, we are condemning their health and their future to a legacy of enhanced disease and deformity. That doesn't make sense.
No, that's a very profound and powerful fact, Alan. One thing, Carol, I know Carol's been having a storm out in Oregon, so she's had to join us by phone now. So thanks, Carol.
Yes,
But
hi.
you shared with me the document or a link I just put in the chat, the Beyond Pesticides. It just came out that regards new fact sheets about the adverse effects of commonly used landscape pesticides and herbicides, right? And 2,4-D is shown in there as well, right? Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said. What was in there?
I said that I shared in the chat with everyone the link about the Beyond Pesticides link about the new facts about the pesticides, commonly used landscape pesticides that you shared with me.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So everybody should take a look at that. And 2,4-D is showing up right there as a major concern. Right. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And that is another big, to me, another one of the unsung scandals is that 2,4-D, the reason 2,4-D was not banned as half of Agent Orange was that it was industry told the government that there were no dioxins in 2,4-D. And that was a big fat lie. There are dioxins in 2,4-D. And it's been found again and again since then, but it is still on the market. And you wouldn't believe what it takes to get something taken off the market. I mean, it's much easier to get a chemical placed on the market with all kinds of literally fake safety testing, but then it takes years and years and decades to get it taken off the market, even after EPA knows that all the data supporting it is fake. So that's another huge change that needs to be made.
Yeah, the process that the Environmental Protection Agency, to take its initials literally, is charged with is proving and securing the safety of these chemicals for the American public. But in fact, they're relying, as Carol said, on the data that the chemical companies are submitting. They're not necessarily testing that data. They're not necessarily looking into medical records. They are gobbling up the filings that they're receiving from the chemical companies. And there have been scandalous exposures of how those filings from the chemical companies have been misrepresenting the safety of their products. And that continues to be a very, very deep issue. Is it the Environmental Protection Agency or is it the Environmental Poison Agency?
Yeah.
I think it's definitely the latter.
Yeah.
It is definitely the.
Yeah, or every polluter's advocate. Sometimes people say
It is.
Yeah. So.
Well, it really is, because their whole function is not to. It is to regulate, not to ban things. And so what they're continually doing is coming up with justification for allowing poisons to be spread in the environment and what levels they're going to allow, which are unbelievably based on a absolutely unfounded assumption that it's okay to kill 1 in every 1 million people that are exposed. Well, when you have hundreds of thousands of poisons that they are approving and each one of them can kill 1 in a million, what's that tell you? So, and not only that, but the assumption itself is a fraud. So the idea of regulating poisons is like regulating serial killers.
Yeah.
It
Community should
makes
be able to ban them, right, Carol?
Yeah. You know, this is an industry that should never have happened. It was all born out of ways to kill people in the first place in warfare, and it should never have happened.
Yeah, yeah.
Plain and simple.
Yeah. Before I wanted to link back to issues in Ohio. Before I do that, also I know some people are, and perhaps everyone, interested in how the Vietnamese activist Tran Ton Nha, how's she doing? She has cancer. What's the latest on her case as well?
It's so sad. Not that Madame Tran's health is more deeply impaired than we see in the film. She has had serious bout with breast cancer, and she has liver symptoms and a variety of other issues that she clearly attributes to her exposure to Agent Orange during the Vietnam War years. But lamentably, after her heroic efforts to hold the chemical companies accountable with her lawsuit in France, after 7 years, as we note at the end of the film, 7 years of procedural hearings, the French court threw her case out, dismissed it out of hand without addressing any of the issues that concerned the malfeasance of the chemical companies in their knowing production and sale of these toxic herbicides. Instead, the court did the same thing in France that the American courts did against the Vietnamese when they brought a suit decades ago, and threw it out, saying it's not in our jurisdiction to rule about acts of war. Well, this wasn't just about acts of war. Of course, the United States never, ever should have sprayed Vietnam, an expanse of Vietnam as big as the state of Massachusetts or the country of Belgium, never should have exposed that civilian population to this poison. But to conduct hearings for 7 years and then to come in with a verdict saying we are not competent to judge this case was heartbreaking. For Madame Tran, for her lawyers, for a massive support movement, Justice for Tran Ton Nha. It says, I even have a face mask, a COVID face mask that spells that out. And her appeal is very, very important. And they have had major manifestations right at the base of the Eiffel Tower to insist on more court conscientious process. And there's some hope that that appeal will sway the court. But we're deeply afraid that the courts, just as the parliaments and legislatures are, may be under the influence of corporate money.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one thing I wanted to say here, and then ask for maybe some parting remarks. I see so many parallels in this story in other things, like, for example, the issue of fracking. And here in Ohio, besides that, there's the spreading of the radioactive oil and gas brine, because it's salty, but it's highly radioactive for de-icing and dust control here in Ohio. The industry has known about this for decades, the radioactivity of oil and gas operations. They knew about Agent Orange. They knew about the PFAS, the forever chemicals, and it's still allowed it to happen there. So, and with all of these things, their environmental consequences are very long time. Like I said, they call those forever chemicals for a reason, the ones in dark waters in the film. You mentioned that the dioxin half-life is 2 billion years. Here, the radium-226 in oil and gas waste that's getting spread in roads, and just that the workers are shipping this stuff around. Its half-life is 1,600 years, so it's going to stay radioactive for thousands of years. So, like you said, Al, we're jeopardizing future generations, many future generations, and we can't keep making these kind of environmental decisions there. So I know there's many more, like you talk about the courts and how difficult it is and how hard it is to get justice too. I know we've only got a few minutes left, but yeah, if you'd like to comment on that, you, Carol, and then also I just like to say, what gives you hope and what keeps you fighting? I'd like to ask that as well as you can comment on what I just said. I know
I don't know about the hope. I don't know about the hope, except that what's the alternative to fighting?
Yeah.
And there really isn't one.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
as long as we're alive and we care,
yeah,
I guess that's what it all comes down to. It's, you know, do we care?
right.
And if we care, we have to do something. And whatever you can do, you know, it's like there isn't any recipe for caring and for what you can do about it. You have to do what you're capable of, whether it's making phone calls or fighting, you know, making demonstrations or voting campaigns. Whatever people are capable of, do it.
Mm-hmm.
Do it.
Yeah,
It's
organizing.
because that's all that's left to us.
Yeah,
We have to make change. We just have to. And as
Mhm.
long as we're here, we can make it happen. I mean, I
Yeah.
guess that's a bit of hope, isn't it?
Right.
I think the voice that we're hearing and Carol's heroism is perhaps one of the greatest gifts that our film can share with its viewers. She is an extraordinarily heroic woman. If she and her heroism can inspire you, please find legislators, find organizations, take action. If we don't defend ourselves, no one will. And how ridiculous can it be to take nuclear radiation and spread it out everywhere when it needs to be contained and not exposed to people? The gap of logic, the ridiculous practices that are going on, spraying herbicides like clouds from the air. Are we insane?
Yeah. So you're right. And yeah, just one thing that I wanted to add before we close is in our first question and answer for our first film, What is Democracy? Asked Taylor, she said, hope is a discipline. In other words, to really have hope, you have to act on it. And so that's what we encourage people to do and learn more and get involved, organize, find groups that and gain power together. So I know there's so much more we could have covered there. Carolyn's poison papers with all those documents, so many other things that, but of course we got to a lot, I think. And it's been an honor and a privilege to have Carol and Alan joining us and sharing this incredible film and the incredible work. And thank you both so much, and Carolyn, for your inspiring decades of fighting and activism, and a real hero to us all there. Thank you so much.
Thank
Well,
you. It's
thank
an
you.
honor to be with your festival.
Yes,
Well, it's been an honor having
definitely.
you. Yeah.
I'm sorry
so
my
much.
power went out.
Now you speak
Glad you got
clearly
back
anyway,
on.
Carol.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Keep up
Bye.
the fight.
Are we through?